What is up, guys, and welcome to JamPlay, a Rock of Ages live course. I am Alex Scott. I will be your instructor. For the next 10 weeks, we are going over classic rock of all shapes and sizes. So we're going to be starting out today sort of kind of a 50s vibe, late 50s, kind of a Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, think about that kind of a thing. We're going to talk a lot about that. I've got a really cool backing track here for you guys that we're going to go ahead and learn. And then moving on through the course, we're going to go, 50s into the early 60s, late 60s. We're going to be looking at all kinds of different stuff from different bands. I've got backing tracks pretty much every week for you guys to play along with, which is going to be a ton of fun. And we're also going to do a ton of Q&A. Any questions that you guys might have about bass playing, whether it's specific to the music that we're learning, or just anything in general, we will cover it for you. So it's going to be a really, really great time. We're going to go all the way up until I think the mid 80s is what we're shooting for. So a lot of fun stuff coming up for you guys. Hope you will continue to tune in to this course every Wednesday from 4 to 6. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We definitely appreciate it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into learning this track that I've got here for you guys. So this track is, again, we're starting off in, the late 50s. Again, artists like Chuck Berry, artists like Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, guys who really, most people really look at as the origin of the quote-unquote rock and roll sound, where things really started to move away from, jazz and swing music, away from ragtime, away from spirituals and world music and all this stuff that had been going on up until that point. These are some really pioneering guys who took everything from the jazz element to, Robert Johnson with super old school blues, and sort of melded everything together into a new, sort of much harder, quote unquote, rock sound, and kind of started a whole revolution that lasted a really, really long time and is still going today. There's a lot of music coming out today that you can trace back to these roots and even back to earlier than that. So, it's really, really cool to watch how a lot of these ideas start in one place, pulling from what came before them and then continue to evolve over time. So we're going to be talking a lot about that as we go through this course and sort of who borrowed from who and who influenced who. So on that note, since we're starting in the 50s with this sort of kind of rockabilly vibe, the earliest incarnations of rock and roll, there's a lot of different techniques, just as far as the bass goes and as far as all instruments go, rather. There's a lot of techniques, a lot of sounds that came from before and have been sort of updated, at the time updated to the 50s to create a different and a new sound. And, the basis for this track that you'll hear and sort of where I view the shift away from, again, your jazz and your blues and that stuff into early rock, in my mind, it happened really first and foremost with the bass and drums and the kinds of things that they were playing, and then in turn how, the guitar and its role in music responded to that. So before this era, you didn't have a lot of what we call straight time. Now, when I talk about straight time, I think pretty much everybody here will understand the idea of 4/4 time. So you have 4 beats in one measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And, most everything is based around that as sort of your metric grid, right? So before this, you had, a lot of jazz music that was swung. So, a very sort of a triplet feel, as you would call it, or a swung feel. And, that's where the whole jazz you have that kind of a feel, that kind of a rhythm going on in a lot of Western music. And then where you would find the more sort of straight, much more even subdivision, you had that coming sort of out of a lot of Latin and Afro-Cuban music, and you even had it coming out of a lot of elements of classical music. So what happened here in the early 50s is that a lot of guys started saying, okay, well, we're going to take the instrumentation that we're familiar with from jazz combos, which was usually bass, drums, guitar, piano, maybe a saxophone, and usually a vocalist. We're going to take that idea and we're going to apply it to these straighter rhythms. And you also had, the drummer very specifically had, it became a thing of playing the snare drum on the 2 and the 4. That's sort of one of the hallmarks of the earliest rock music, in my opinion, is moving away from free, open jazz drums or Latin drum patterns or anything like that, and moving towards a boom, boom, ka, boom, 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 ka, boom, 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 ka. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That, to me, that's sort of the genesis point, quote unquote, is when the drummers decided, hey, we're going to just start slamming the snare drum on the 2 and the 4. Again, all of this coming out of these earlier rhythms that were then sort of reimagined and applied to new stuff. On the bass side of things, and this is what we're going to get into with this backing track here in a minute, in jazz, you traditionally had walking bass lines. So walking bass line is quarter notes that sort of walk around the neck. That kind of a thing. Very, very common in jazz and swing. Well, they took that and they said, you know what, we've got this harder, this more rocking drum pattern. So instead of doing that, and moving around and constantly playing all these different notes, we're just going to do what we call a pedal. And that's what we're starting with today. And this is sort of why we're starting here, because this is, again, this is one of these, as I call it, an origin point for something that's been carried on and continued on until now, and I'm sure well into the future. So, again, walking bass lines being quarter notes that move around, said we need something that drives more. We need something that pushes more, that has a lot more energy behind it. So they developed the idea of pedaling bass lines, which is typically eighth notes, so twice as fast. So if your quarter notes, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the idea is double that and don't move around very much at all. That kind of an idea, right? It drives more. It sort of sits back in the mix, so to speak, a little bit more. So you're not drawing as much attention to the notes that you're playing. You're just filling in that low end. You're providing a nice big low fundamental note and really pushing everything along. Now, for any of you guys who are watching who have seen my beginning bass concepts course, my phase 1 course, or if any of you happen to tune into the live event on January 2nd, you guys have heard me talk a lot about, and I'll say this probably 1,000 times over this course and all of my courses, because it's such an important thing to me, and I think an important thing to this instrument. Everything here and everything that we're talking about is, first and foremost, it's about understanding your role in the band as a bass player, because that's really where the purpose of the bass comes into its own, and that's really where the enjoyment, at least for me, of being a bass player really comes from. Is it's not a thing of being flashy. It's not a thing of being out front and having everybody go, oh wow, that guy's amazing. It's a thing of really understanding your role in a group of musicians and listening while you're playing and understanding all of the pieces that go into you having a job that is not flashy and is not out front and not shiny, but it's really important. And most modern bands in the music that we all know and love, rock and blues and funk and all that stuff, can't function without a bass player. They really can't. You can add and remove other instruments depending on the situation, but bass is one that you're pretty much always going to see every single time, no matter what. Or if not specifically a bass guitar player, then somebody filling that role, because it's so critical to the sound of the music. So that's something that we're going to be focusing on a lot today and in this entire course. So, again, tying that back to this track and everything I was talking about with the pedaling bass line, this is a great example of a situation where in a given era, again, early 50s, mid 50s, late 50s, bass players and bands as a whole started to sort of rethink what they were doing and started to pull in these new elements and have these new ideas. And it changed the course of everything to come. Now, subsequently, the response beyond that and the where it ended up moving was obviously focusing on the guitar as the lead instrument. And so as you had the drums moving away from being open and more free and a little bit more busy, a little bit more complex pattern-wise, and you had the bass doing the same thing, moving away from all these walking lines that were going all over the neck and just moving towards big, simple pedaling lines, this created two things. A lot more energy behind the sound, and B, a lot more space. And so instead of a guitar player just chanking along chords like they might have done before, suddenly, people started to figure out distortion, and they started to figure out all the things that we know and love about rock guitar, because there was suddenly, there was a new palette coming out of the drummer and the bass player of this really driving rhythm. And it gave them a lot of room to open up and really start to experiment with soloing and with, all these awesome techniques that guitar players do. So that's sort of, again, in my opinion, I guess, where that came out of was, this period in time where you had a lot going on just as far as rhythm section players and music as a whole just sort of shifting in this direction of what we now know as rock, and then the guitar and the lead instruments sort of responding to that and going, okay, cool, well, you guys are going to do that. We're going to figure out this whole new world of sound for us. So, again, everything just is always going to come back to understanding your role as a musician in the band, your role as a bass player, and how you are there to, on a fundamental level, support all the other musicians that you're playing with. So that's going to be a big focus of this lesson and of this entire course. So I hope you guys are digging on that. So let's go ahead and take a look at our track here today. Can I get the tab up on the screen here? There we go. So again, we're going to start. This guy is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's 12-bar blues in the key of E. So we're really just going to be focusing on this pedaling line. Which, as you can see on your screen, we're starting, since we're in the key of E, obviously we're going to be starting on our open E string. And so, even you just look right there at that first bar, it is just open eighth notes on the E string. It's that simple. Moving into the second bar, we're going to continue that pedal for 3 beats, so a total of 6 notes. And then we're going to move up and we're going to fret real quick 3 and 4, 3rd and 4th fret on the E string. So those first 2 bars are going to sound like this. 4. And there's our 3rd and 4th fret. So now what this is doing right here is it's just a little quick thing to remind us that we are in the key of E dominant. Okay, so now what I mean when I say dominant chord is I'm just talking about the structure of the chord overall. So obviously chords are built out of scales. You've got your major scale and your minor scale, and then you have your dominant scale. Now, traditional major scale is right there. Really easy way to think about this is to use an idea that we call intervals. And an interval is just, it is basically a number assigned to each note of that scale. And this is universal between all keys, all scales. It's always, you can look at everything in numbers. And that way, when you're practicing in one key, you can very easily move ideas into a different key. Because instead of thinking about each individual note, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, I just think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 or 1 again because it's the octave. So that's your major scale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, octave, 1, 8, however you want to say it. In a dominant scale, it's going to be the same exact scale, except that 7th note, we're going to move down 1 fret. We're going to flat the 7th, okay? So we're just moving it down a half step. Now, in terms of notes, this is going to be, in a normal E major scale, you would play your D sharp right here, which is your 8th fret on your G string. In this dominant scale, we're playing a D natural, your 7th fret on your G string. So your dominant scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. Okay? Now a dominant chord, all chords are made using the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and then sometimes 7th notes of a scale. Would be a normal E major. Just a straight E major chord would be like that. An E dominant chord, you got to get that D natural in there. Dominant chords are a lot of, they're something that come out of realistically classical music, but they mostly come out of jazz, is where you will most commonly hear them, and then they were adopted into a lot of these early forms of rock. So, anyways, getting back to this little thing that we're doing in the track here, where we're going E, E, G, G sharp, we're landing on that major third. So we're basically just outlining this chord, right? So that's the idea behind that. It's just giving a tiny little bit of extra oomph into just saying, okay, this is sort of harmonically, the sound that you're creating. This is the chord. This is the scale that we're working in. So that's your first 2 bars. Bars 3 and 4 are exactly the same thing. 1, 2, 3. But now, moving into bar 5, we're going up to the next chord in this progression, which is an A. Okay, so we're just going to move up to our open A string and do the exact same shape. So the first bar of our A chord here, bar 5, we're going A, same shape, 3, 4, 3rd fret, 4th fret. And that's, if you look here, it's the same kind of a pattern. So this note, which is your C sharp, 4th fret A string, is the major third of your A chord, right? So it's the same exact idea. We're just outlining the tones that are used in these chords. So again, here's our bar number 5, the first bar of the A. Got 2, 3. Continue to pedal. And then we go 3rd fret, 4th fret on the E string to resolve back down to our open E. Now what this is doing is it's moving out of the A, and it's introducing tones that are going to lead your ear naturally back to expecting the E to fall. Okay? So now we've arrived at the 7th bar. We're back in the key of E. And again, we've got a bar of just pedal. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to move up. We're going to go 4th fret and then open A string. And we're going to land over that B7 chord. And we're going to, it's going to be 2nd fret A string. And we're going to pedal that. Then walk down chromatically, which just means, pretty much directly playing the notes in between. So we're going to go B, 2, 3, B, A sharp, A, which is going to walk us down to the A. And then we're going to do what we did before to get from the A back into the E. We're going to go A, 2, 3, G, G sharp, E. Okay, and then we've ended up at E. And we pedal the E for a second, do the same walk up, B, and then we're just going to walk down from here through using a lot of the notes in the E scale. So we're going boom. Okay, and that's sort of a neat resolution to get around, using your C sharp, which is going to be your 6th scale degree of the E, right? So we're going B, A, C sharp, B, E. And that's just a little motif to sort of walk around for a second over that very last measure of B7. Right? And then we've got our repeat sign there at the beginning and at the end, which tells you that we're going to play this through twice. So it connects back to itself effectively. We play that last bar of B, which leads us very, very naturally to start the whole cycle over again. Okay? So now this progression is what we call a 12-bar blues. This is one of the most common progressions you'll see in rock and jazz and funk music over the last 60 or 70 years, probably even longer than that. And all a 12-bar blues realistically means is that it is 12 bars, and it's following this motion of chords. So you've got 4 bars of the root chord. In this case, everything's in E. So the root is E. So we've got 4 bars of the root. A is the 4th note in the E scale, so it's the 4 chord, is how we say that. So we've got 4 bars of the 1, 2 bars of the 4, then 2 bars of the 1. Then it moves up to the B, which in this case is the 5th chord of an E, and then it moves down to the 4 again, and then to the 1, and then a bar of 5. And then it turns around back to the 1. So this shape in any key, going 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 1, 1, 5, 4, 1, 5. That, as a set of chords, as a progression, you will hear all over the place. It's been used in more songs than I could possibly remember off the top of my head. So this as a shape, this as a sound, is something that you guys are going to run into a lot. And it's also a really, really great progression to practice these ideas of leading from one note or one chord or one scale into another. Because it's pretty straightforward. It moves back and forth from some simple relative chords and scales. So it's easy to conceptualize, it's easy to think about, and it's going to build the vocabulary that you guys need in order to play bigger, more complicated chord progressions and still have a good bearing on everything you need to be thinking about as far as what notes that you're choosing and how you're getting from one chord to another. So I've got this backing track here for you guys. I believe you can download it on the site as well to practice along with it on your own. I've got it pulled up here, so I will just go ahead and play through it. You guys can listen or play along if you'd like. Follow along with the music we've got on screen, and yeah, let's get into it. Let's see how it sounds. So there you go. Nice, pretty straightforward. We just, again, run through that progression back to back twice in a row, which is what those repeat signs, the 2 lines with the 2 dots on the music there, indicates repeat. So you just repeat the whole form. And, you can hear there's a, guitar sort of comping that chugging, that kind of an idea in the background. And then there's also the guitar playing lead. And there's enough space for that, again, because, we're not going, and moving all over the place and doing all this stuff, because that takes up more room, sonically speaking. When you sort of simplify things and keep it constrained to this simple pedaling idea, that's what led guitarists to be able to develop that kind of real leady sound and pursue that as an idea, is the fact that we as bass players sort of got out of the way. And again, all of this stuff sort of started to transition in during the 50s, and a lot of this stuff also comes, I'm not going to get into like politics or anything like that here, but just, the social climate of the time. You had beginning of the Cold War and the Korean War. You had a fair, the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement. You had a lot going on in American culture and in the culture globally that we were moving away from sort of, I don't want to, prudish is not a great word, but the culture was evolving basically. People were becoming a little bit freer. People were becoming more liberal generally, and a lot of times if you look back, over the next couple of weeks, we'll get into the early and then into the late 60s. And, as everybody knows, the Vietnam War was a huge thing, not only socially and politically, across the whole world stage, but in terms of music. I mean, how many bands wrote, they're arguably an entire genres of music that came out of the protest music in the late 60s and early 70s over all of the things that were going on with Vietnam and then subsequently with Russia and all this stuff. So you can a lot of times draw parallels between world events and sort of socio-political changes that have gone on, and then how music has sort of responded to those. And in the 50s, you had a lot, it was definitely a time of sort of progress. You had this well-established history of jazz, but because you had a lot of stuff going on socially, people were feeling a little bit angsty. And, that ended up turning itself into this sort of new style of music that we now know as rock. And, it's obviously become commercialized and ubiquitously successful and all this stuff. But almost everything in music always starts as something of a revolution, whether literally, as far as like a political, look at Bob Marley in Jamaica or something. A lot of that was coming directly out of political protest and revolution, or just as a sort of subconscious social thing. And that can be even traced, arguably up until today. But that's a conversation for a different time. And we'll be talking about this stuff again as we move through this course. We're going through all these different decades. And there are a lot of really neat examples where you've got changes going on the global stage as far as, politics or what have you. And that can be, people observe the reflection of that in how music and different musical styles have progressed over time. So that is our backing track. I hope you guys dug it. Again, you should be able to download that track on our site with the supplemental content as well as that sheet music that we had on screen for you. So you guys can download that, practice along with it. Write your own bass lines, come up with your own stuff. See what happens if you take some of those little, shapes that I have in there and play them more often or less often or move them around the neck. That's I think it's a good one to jump in with because it's simple, it's straightforward. But it lays a really good groundwork for everything that we're going to be doing from here on out. So from here, I believe we'll transition over to the Q&A stuff. So let me know what you guys are wondering about, and let's chat about it.
Yeah, I've got a question here that's kind of related to what you were just talking about.
All right.
And this one is from Shorecat325. When did electric bass start to become more popular than upright bass?
Indeed. Great question, Shorecat. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. So the electric bass was invented in 1951 by a gentleman by the name of Leo Fender, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. He also invented this delightful instrument here that I have, the Fender Jazz Bass. He initially created it out of a desire that gets exactly into your question. Upright is a very, very big instrument. It's a very fragile instrument. It's also a very, very difficult instrument to amplify as far as putting it through speakers. Because it's so large, you have a lot of problems with feedback. You've got a lot of sound going on in a room, especially when that sound is being amplified out of an instrument like that. It'll start to resonate with that sound, and it creates a feedback loop. So it's very, very difficult as concerts got bigger, audiences got bigger, speakers got bigger and louder, music got heavier. The upright very quickly just didn't make much sense. It's when you put it in the context of where it normally functions, classical and jazz music, it's great because those are not known for being very loud and aggressive types of music. They can be, but not typically. Rock, obviously, on the other hand, is much louder, much more aggressive. So Fender was really trying to find a way to bring that low-end fundamental sound into rock music so that it could basically keep up with everything else that was going on. So it was really over the course of the 50s. It started with the invention, obviously, in 1951. It was immediately popular with a lot of musicians, and then it sort of grew from there. And overtook upright being used predominantly, I would say, by the early 60s. Pretty much you have the Beatles come around in the, 62, 63, and by that time, not only did Leo Fender have the precision bass, his original design, he'd modified that design. He'd also created the jazz bass in 1969, and then you had a number of other companies, Rickenbacker, Hofner, Gibson, a number of others who had come out with their own designs for electric basses. So the more different kinds of them were manufactured, the more ubiquitous it became. And then by pretty much the early 60s, late 60s, you had a lot more stuff coming in. So there you go.
All right, excellent. Let's see.
Thanks
here.
for that question again.
I have a question from JVL.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain the relationship between the notes you were playing and what would a guitar be playing? Are the notes the same, bass clef / treble clef?
So it's actually very, very easy. These strings are tuned to the exact same pitches that your top 4 guitar strings are tuned to: E, A, D, G. So you could grab your guitar and you would be playing 1 octave up. You'd be playing in that register there, but you can play exactly the same frets and you'll be playing this exact same bass line. As far as the notation, bass clef versus treble clef, in bass clef, the bottom line is a G. The note is a G. In treble clef, the bottom line, I believe, is an E. I don't do a ton in treble clef, so maybe don't entirely quote me on that, but it's very easy to look up and find out. I'm pretty sure it's an E. Yeah. But so reading it is different, just in that on the actual staff, on the notation, the notes will be in a slightly different place. However, on the instrument, the fretting is the same and the strings are tuned the same. So on a 4-string bass, you have 2/3 of a guitar. You would just basically add a B string and an E string, as two of the highest pitch strings, or lowest from your perspective on the instrument. But no, I mean, that whole thing all the tablature that was just on screen for the bass, you can read that directly to a guitar and you'll be playing exactly the same notes. So that's kind of one of the really, really nice things. And, I always recommend, like I remember we were doing the live event on January 2nd. Again, if anybody tuned into that, there was a gentleman with a very similar question, but more in regards to how learning bass would help him with his guitar playing. And, since it's so easy to translate, since the strings are tuned to the same pitches, I always recommend guitar players try to pick up some bass because it gives you a lot of additional concepts and ideas about music that you might not necessarily encounter strictly playing guitar. So it's really easy to translate between the two. You've got same pitches, same tune strings, same frets, same spots. So, yeah, there you go.
All right, excellent. This one's from Southern Cash. Do you ever play more than 1 note at a time?
Indeed. Hello, Southern Cash. Thank you. That gets into sort of a personal preference thing. Obviously, you can certainly play up to 4 notes at a time. It gets a little bit tricky when you're playing with a band because everything is so low in pitch. Trying to play a shape or a sound like that behind a whole rock band, you can end up getting drowned out. Now, one technique that I do definitely use in bands is sometimes I will play octaves. Which kind of helps to fill out the sound and make it sound a little bit thicker. And so that's just, whatever fret you're starting on, you go over 2 strings and up 2 frets, and that's going to be your octave right there. Again, just the same as it is on a guitar. Or sometimes I will put, the top 1 note from the top part of a chord. Like that's a C here on your 8th fret E string, and then I'll go over and I'll fret 9th fret G string and E. And that would make a C major sound, basically. So I'll do that behind a band. But 9 times out of 10 bass players know we're usually only playing 1 note at a time. Again, just because it's not, you play a whole big voiced out chord on a guitar. It's a lot trickier to do that on a bass because you have fewer strings, it's lower in pitch. And, when on the guitar, when you have that G to B and then an E again, and you can hit the same note here as you're hitting up here on your E string, it's a lot more conducive to things like bar chords. Bar chords don't work nearly as well on a bass as they do on a guitar for a number of reasons, but that being one of them is you don't have those strings that are set up and tuned to work well for that kind of a thing. So that is sort of the story on multiple notes at once. So yeah, thank you again for the question.
All right. This one is from Play-Doh Fun Factory. When I play directly over my neck pickup on my jazz, assuming jazz bass, I get a harmonic sound that I find annoying. Is that more technique or EQ?
You get a harmonic sound. I am not 1,000% sure what you mean by that. Something that could be happening for you on certain frets. Normally when we say harmonic, we mean those are your harmonics, and that's a product of physics that I could go into for hours because it's actually really interesting and cool. Anybody who's interested in it, definitely look it up. It's very interesting why that happens. But it could be a technique thing. It's rarely an EQ thing. I will say that because I found that 9 times out of 10, even on a low quality instrument or through low quality amplification or something like that, it's if you're playing with good technique, it should always sound at least okay, or at least pretty good. Obviously, the nicer bass and stuff, it's going to sound wonderful, but you should always focus on your technique sounding as good as possible first and foremost. So I would say, as far as that goes, it could be a situation where if you're maybe not fully releasing the string with your finger, you can get what they call false harmonics, which can be sort of weird, kind of hard to demonstrate. Something like that, which obviously it looks like I'm doing something kind of complicated, but if you've got maybe extra fingers on the string, or if you aren't muting or you're not pushing down hard enough with your left hand, it can cause some sort of weird overtone sound. So just always make sure that you're fretting and pushing down very cleanly, and that you are, keeping all of your unnecessary fingers out of the way. Like, big thing I see with beginning bass players is a pinky will come out on the right hand, and that can be kind of weird, especially the more you play, your pinky can sort of end up freaking out and running into some strings down here. So you always just want to have a nice, relaxed hand that's sort of retracted, so that none of your fingers are in the way and all of your playing surfaces are extended fully, like this, right? See my fingers back here, my ring and my pinky are not out. I pull them back in. And then just like that. And so once, as long as you're fretting cleanly here, you've got nice, good, positive pressure there. You're muting the other strings there with your fingers, whichever one is most comfortable, like that, right? And then you've got good, positive contact on the right hand with your index or your middle finger here. Then you should be in pretty good shape tone-wise. So that would be. Again, I'm really sorry. I don't know exactly what you mean by the sound that you're getting, but that's my guess. Is maybe you've got some extraneous fingerage or something like that going on. So just focus on those real clean attack, clean pressure everywhere, and you should resolve that. So
There was a little bit of clarification.
Oh, okay. Great.
A high-pitched ringing above the played note.
A high-pitched ringing above the played note. Okay, yeah. So that sounds to me, if that's the kind of sound you're getting right there, that could be you're not pushing hard enough with your left hand, or that could actually be the setup on your bass. If your neck and your frets aren't properly lined up, then you might have some buzz. I've got this bass set up pretty well, so it doesn't do that. But that kind of a thing comes from either not enough pressure with your left hand, or if your bass isn't set up correctly, or you've got a bad fret somewhere, that'll also happen. Good indicator of that is if it only happens on one particular string, or on a couple of particular strings, or in one area of the neck. It plays great down here, and then you get up here, and it starts sounding weird or vice versa, then there could be something wrong with the setup of the instrument itself. And I would recommend taking it to a technician at your local music shop. And it's a very easy fix. They just tweak what's called the truss rod, which runs down and controls the curvature of the neck, and maybe sand the frets down a little bit to make sure they're even. So that could be another problem there as well. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for the clarification, by the way.
All right. This next one was from Edge EM. It says, "Hi Alex, today I got the new Fender Standard Precision bass that I won at the giveaway, part 2. Thank you very much. I'm a drummer with a little guitar, never played bass. Suggestions for getting started?"
First of all, it's awesome that you're a drummer. I am also I guess I'm a bass player turned drummer, but I play a lot of drums myself. So rock on there. And it's going to give you a massive leg up, not as far necessarily as the physical technique, but as far as understanding, the stuff I keep talking about with the role of the bass in the band and how to lock in with the drummer and really play with groove and feel. You're going to be on really, really good standing there. So that's awesome. I would really, I would just say, listen and learn, man. In addition, I've got my phase 1 course here on the site, which starts at the very, very beginning with just the physical pieces and how to hold it and everything, and through the phase 1 will be working all the way up towards being able to play in multiple different genres with lots of different techniques. So that's a good resource. There's a number of other beginner courses here on JamPlay that are fantastic. In addition, stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of really other really, really great instructors out there doing stuff, and just watch and learn and listen. Watch bass players that you enjoy. Pay attention to their hands. Listen to the notes that they're playing and how kind of their vibe is. And then always be thinking of it. Never lose your drummer's perspective, because that's a really, really cool and unique way to come to an instrument like the bass, coming from drums, because you already have those ideas of rhythm and of groove and of feel and of solid natural time, and that is so critical for a bass player. So I'd say you really cool that you're coming from that, and yeah, just take what you want to learn technique wise and find the resources for it, and just let yourself be inspired, man. Because that's what it's all about, is creating and having fun and falling in love with an instrument. So. Awesome, and congratulations, by the way, on winning. That's really cool. I remember giving that away. That was an awesome time. So glad to hear you received it, man. That's great. You got a nice bass.
Yes, and EdGM was also wanting to know if you would recommend him getting that set up by a professional tech.
I played that bass. It's fine as it is now. I'm sure if you took it into somebody and put some money into it, they could maybe lower the action a little bit or something. But I very distinctly remember playing that bass that day for a while here on camera, and it felt fine. It felt very similar to the precision bass that I have at home. So it should be in pretty good shape. I mean, I guess something might have happened in shipping. So if it's weird, or like I was talking about earlier, you've got the buzzing going on and you're making sure to push real hard and do everything right, then there's always a chance that something happens during shipping, just because of elevation changes and stuff. So if it's acting weird, then I'd take it in, but I remember that bass playing very, very well. So you should be fine there. Thanks, Edge. Appreciate you, man.
All right. Next one is from Southern Cash again. And the question is, so mostly you play the root note and sometimes throw in the third or the fifth, maybe?
That is exactly right, Southern Cash. That is exactly right. Most of the time, again, talking within the context of rock, this changes throughout a lot of different genres. So, again, if you're playing jazz, then you'll be playing all of the notes in the scale and then some. But when we're talking in rock, a lot of the time, if you listen to the bass player, yeah, they're hanging out on that root, or they're a fifth, a third. Or they've got, a seventh is another really, really common one. But definitely. That's number one root note that I use is the root. Number 2 note is the fifth, always. And then third is good for are we in major or minor, and then seventh is good for are we dominant or are we not. And most riffs that you'll see, and then this even gets back to the pentatonic scale. If we know our pentatonic scales. That is literally 1 through, I mean, in this case, a flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, 1. Basic minor pentatonic scale. And almost all riffs are going to be based out of that, and you're just outlining those chord tones. So yes, spot on. That's exactly where you should be focusing. Obviously, you can do lots of other things, and again, for different genres, you'll move outside of that. That is a good rule of thumb for rock music. Root 5th, maybe the 3rd, maybe the 7th, and you're going to be in great shape. So thank you.
All right, next question is again from Shortcat325. What are some bassists that stand out from the golden oldies era?
There are a number. I personally, I have never super extensively listened to a time. I mean, obviously, I've heard it and I've played it a bunch and studied it a bit. I never fell in love with that era as much as a lot of people have. I was a bit more getting into the 60s kind of a guy, but I would, and then the other kind of problem is that there were less concepts of bands back then. So a lot of the bass players were just studio guys. But I would, more than seeking out specific bass players, I would seek out the popular artists of the day and then listen to the bass lines. Because you're going to find, again, a lot of those guys, they weren't necessarily just using one band or just one bass player. So it's kind of hard. The one guy that I do know that I have studied and that I really, really like is Donald Duck Dunn. And yes, I did say Donald Duck. But Donald Dunn was his name. I believe he was Booker T in the MGs. Again, don't maybe not quote me on that, but I know he did not only that, but then a lot of studio and session work and stuff back in the day. So a lot of his bass lines are really prominent. Another big guy, not as much 50s, moving a little bit more 60s Motown, was James Jamerson, who played on a lot of the great old Motown records, the Supremes and Temptations and stuff like that. And he was most famous for he actually only used one finger on his right hand. I mean, he had all of his fingers, but he only used he called it the hook, and he would play everything just with his index finger on his right hand. And that really lends to the Motown sound. And the guy who used the precision bass, actually, for Edge, if you want to look into guys who use precisions, James was very famous for using exclusively a precision bass for a very long time. But, again, a little more early 60s, but he's another great guy to listen to for cues sort of from that era. So there's two names, and then again, I just listen to the artists, listen to the popular records, and you'll hear what's going on. So, good question, though. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
Maybe just give everybody an overview of tonight and maybe tease them a little bit what's coming up next week.
Absolutely. No, yeah. So we just, we went over our backing track there, or sort of our 50s vibe thing with the 12-bar blues. And again, you guys, that 12-bar blues form that we went over is going to be something that you see all over the place in a lot of different genres of music over decades and decades of time. Very, very famous, very popular progression. So just, be thinking about how we're functioning, be thinking about locking in with that drummer, be thinking about really driving a consistent, steady rhythm, and be thinking about how these notes are moving, how we're leading from the E into the A or whatever chords we're playing. Because that's the foundation for how you build a great bass line is how you choose notes to move from one chord into another chord and move through a progression to not only create motion, but then also to create a solid rhythmic and harmonic foundation for everybody else in the band to sit back on. You sort of glue everything together. So now we're going to continue sort of chronologically. That's how this whole course is set up. So next week we're going to hit the early 60s, and I've got a very Beatlesy track that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to be learning a little bit about syncopated rhythms. We're going to be learning a little bit, again, talking about motion in bass lines between chords, a different kind of chord progression. And we're going to have another great backing track for you guys to play along with so that you can sort of hear everything in context. And, we'll take a look at sort of what led to the introduction of that music, where the Beatles came from, what was so different about that sound, even from the stuff we've talked about today, and sort of the whole idea of the British invasion and everything that led into that. So we're going to go there, and then from there we'll go into the late 60s, early 70s, and then on. So Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Everybody here at JamPlay really appreciates you. I believe we have the fantastic Chris Lipe up next with Guitar 101. So anybody who wants to stick around for that definitely should. He is awesome, and I'm sure he's going to be teaching some really cool stuff. So I think if that is all, then yeah, thank you guys again for tuning in. Hope everybody's doing all right, and we will see you next Wednesday from 4 to 6. Thanks again.